Family Tech. I'm your host, Rachel Needle, joined as always by Chris Bouvier. Hey, Chris.
Hey, what's going on, Rachel?
Not much. What are we talking about this week?
Well, here's what I got for you today. I brought something with me, actually, Rachel. I was looking at journal articles, and I came across one that I guess is relatively new. It came back out in May 2020, and it's titled The Effects of Telepractice to Support Family Members in Modeling a Speech-Generating... The effects of telepractice to support family members in modeling a speech-generating device in the home. And this was done by Sarah Douglas, Elizabeth Biggs, Hida Medan, and Atika Bhagawan. Like I said, it came out May 2021. And, just reading like the synopsis of it, it's something that it just really resonated with me. And I know it's going to resonate with Rachel because you and I, when the pandemic first struck and everyone was moving online, there was this general negativity around like, well, it can't be done. I mean, it can't be done. What? We can't do it. And then, of course, everyone proved everybody wrong, and we did it, right? But one of the things that we tried to shout from the rooftops here on the podcast in a bunch of presentations we did together and separately was the idea that coaching, if you coach parents, if the dynamics worked in such a way that you could coach parents through the experience, and maybe not just the parents, but the family members, then maybe they would have a greater success anyway, like even more than direct therapy. And this is some evidence that suggests that's the case. So first, what are your thoughts? Because then I was going to dig in a little bit and kind of give you the little, the purpose, the method, the results, and the conclusions.
I am so happy that there is research to affirm what I feel like I already knew, but just from my clinical experience. And yes, I mean, I think that what's super fascinating is that a lot of my kids made more progress than ever during the pandemic. And I feel like I can attribute it back to coaching, like a coaching model of intervention. And so anyway, let's dive into the details. I'm excited that we have this new piece of research that we can kind of dive into.
Yeah, so they said they took a whole family intervention approach here. So it is sort of a single subject, but there's 5 people involved. There's the student and 4 family members. So this was a 4-year-old child with complex communication needs who was using some sort of speech-generating device. And that particular student had 4 family members that participated not only in the study, but also the intervention. And so what the intervention was is that the clinicians attempted to teach those 4 family members a memory aid to help them do partner augmented input or aided language stimulation model, right? Become better at modeling. So we know the strategy is, we know the skill that we want people to learn is being better at modeling and aided language stimulation. What's the strategy behind that? Well, the one they used to kind of get into people's minds was called prepare, show, wait, and respond, which to me sounds very similar to comment, ask, respond. CAR is another one. So whatever the strategy might be, there is a strategy to try and get these clinicians attempted to teach a strategy to the family members to get better at modeling. In this case, prepare, show, wait, and respond. And what they found, they all did this through telepractice, through training and coaching, and they found that, of course, the family members had a high rate of modeling, and the child showed an increase in independent communication and rate of AAC use. And so they found it to be valid, that this worked for them, worked for this particular family, and they wrote it up in this article, and that was pretty exciting. It says here that future research, of course, should examine more, but like what a good outcome here, right? I mean, and it's not surprising to me that if you spend time teaching people something and you spend time coaching them and they spend time practicing it, that they get better at it and the people that they're supporting get better at it.
I love it. I have a question. I have a few questions, actually, some follow-up questions. I'm curious how long the intervention was for.
I think, Rachel, that it took, the entire thing took a span of about 5 months. They said that they did it from August 2019 through January 2020.
Okay, interesting. So they started doing this research prior to the pandemic. And they probably figured, like, when the pandemic hit, like, whoa, thank goodness we're doing research on this.
Really, right? I mean, they already had some sort of an inkling. And of course, you were doing this beforehand, meaning you were coaching families remotely, right? I mean, that was before the pandemic. And I just wonder, now as more people are vaccinated, of course, people are back in buildings and schools. And I wonder how much of this will last. Do you know? Like, will it continue will people go back to the old way of doing things? Or will coaching via telepractice persist because, one, we have evidence here. I mean, clearly this is one piece of evidence, but then the research article, but then, of course, the other evidence is that we've just seen it work, right? We've seen it work for our students and our families. So what are your thoughts?
It's actually a really great question. So a lot of the families that I work with are pushing for in-person, and even with my coaching. And I'm like, it actually is way easier to do coaching remotely for me. So it's like, could I do things in person? Sure. But one, the whole stress of having to get somewhere, I feel like is alleviated, which is huge, I think, especially, both sides. For families who are already kind of going to lots of different therapies and have lots of things going on. And also as clinicians, having to drive from site to site. And so I think that there's that layer. But I really like to use a lot of videos in my sessions, in my coaching sessions, and we watch back videos. So I use video asynchronously. Sometimes I'll even use it, I'll watch, something in real time and record it, and then we'll watch that video back. And so it's just, there's so many. It slows down the process for me. The video really slows down. We can pause, we can rewind, we can watch back and reflect. And so, I just wonder how we can start incorporating more of those strategies. Now we don't necessarily have to, right? Before we had to because we had nothing else. Now we don't have to, but we can and we should. And one of the biggest things I hear from school-based SLPs is I just feel like there's no carryover at home. Right? That's the biggest struggle is how do I impact families at home when families are at home and I'm at school, right? And this is the way. This is how you impact families at home. This is how you get carryover. And so really thinking outside the box and how can we use the minutes that we have for students on our caseload and contribute some of those minutes to helping a family and coaching them remotely. Because again, the technology is there now. Everyone's comfortable with the technology. It's just a matter of scheduling it and doing it. And I also think that, perhaps you have to get some buy-in, right? I'm even trying to get buy-in with some of my families who are like, I want to see you in person. I want you to do all these things in person. It oftentimes comes from families who haven't really started the coaching process yet. And so they think that I'm going to be working across the table from their, child. And I'm like, that's not what this is. That's not what I do. Not to say I never do it, but, for the most part, I'm helping you help your child communicate. And so I just wonder how we can start thinking through that lens and really advocating for that. Even on a smaller scale, it doesn't have to be weekly you're meeting with families, but maybe you take some of those minutes and monthly, you're checking in and, seeing what's happening at home and being able to do some coaching in that, context.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me that people are continuing to ask, even though they've seen it work. But I guess, of course, that makes sense to me that if they're new and they have a vision of what speech therapy is and it's not at all what you do, then yeah, because I've run into that myself where there's parents that are like, what do you mean? You strap the child down and you give them speech therapy with a spoon, right? I mean, isn't that how you do it? It's like, no, it's not like that at all. See, I'm going to play on the floor or whatever, whatever. What people have in their mind isn't necessarily what's most effective, especially for someone who has some experience under their belt,
What's super interesting too is that on my intake form, it's it has a lot of information, but one of them is I am open to telepractice, yes or no. And so many families are like, no, hard no. And I'm like, I get that if you're thinking through the lens of my child is sitting across from the screen and Rachel's trying to work with them. So it's just interesting that there's still kind of this idea about telepractice with complex communicators. Because I think that a lot of practitioners, like, despite knowing that a coaching model makes sense and all these things, like, they still tried to have this like session, like this direct model delivery through telepractice, which I can't even imagine. Like, I imagine doing that with some of the kids that I work with, and like, of course it felt like it didn't work because it probably didn't, you know?
Now, along those same lines, I am involved with a lot of coaching of educators, right? And so it's not necessarily the families that I'm directly working with, but it's more educators. And we've seen something similar there where people are like, yeah, come into the building, come see us. We thought we'd see, so far, we thought we'd see more people wanting to continue remote, and now it's like, nah, we'll just come do the coaching in person, come see us in person. And I'm just shocked by it, because maybe it's because people are like burnt out on this. When I say this, I mean, you and I are using Zoom right now to, maybe they're burnt out on video conferencing and they just want in-person experiences. But, like you said, there's so many advantages to doing it this way, to recording, to watching it asynchronously, to data collection, to having the video that you can go back to months later and be like, let's watch how you used to be when you interacted. Now look at how your skills have grown. So I would continue to be an advocate for it. I mean, I feel like this telepractice, and especially coaching families and educators, needs to be something we do more frequently, not go back to the way it was, because the way it wasn't working all that great.
And I think, just kind of to add on to that, it doesn't have to be this either or type of approach. I think a hybrid approach probably is best. So maybe you initially start off by going into the classroom and modeling some of these strategies, right? Like, here's what it looks like to do aided language input. Here's what descriptive teaching looks like. Whatever it is the skill that you're trying to teach. Like, I end up doing this incidentally because part of, when I'm working with a student is kind of getting a good assessment, and whether that's finding a new system or finding their current system. And so part of the assessment process for me, I do virtually first to just kind of get some information, so that when I'm there, I'm like really maximize my time. I feel like I already know the student based on all the information that I got. And then as I'm like working with the student, I'm teaching those strategies. I'm showing, like, right now I'm modeling this, and I'm waiting to see what happens after I model before I jump in and I ask a question. So those kinds of things I think you can do in person and then transition to remote. So it doesn't have to be this like either or, like I'm only going to be remote or I'm only going to be in person. I think you can do both. And, what we hear all the time, Chris, from, school-based SLPs and all SLPs is like, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time and I have a huge caseload. And so it's like, hey, you don't have to drive 45 minutes to get to that school. Like, it's just not necessary. Now, I realize that a lot of times there's administrative things going on that's like, I want you to be at that school. So that's a different story, right? But if you have the ability to, communicate with administrators about, how you can maximize your efficiency and your time, I'm sure, administrators would be really interested in hearing about your ideas to do that.
Yeah, 100%. Same thing with saving teachers' time when coaching them. Like, now you don't have to drive from one place to a next. And I really love the idea there that it's not absolute, that it has to be this way or that way, but that it's a hybrid approach. And that is probably the best, right? In that you can be flexible to the people that you're serving. And so you create some sort of personalized approach. And depending on what's happening in the circumstances of the session, you might say, all right, how about the next session I come in and I want to show you some things and you observe me, and well, how about you hold the camera and record me, and then we'll analyze me doing it and see what I did there and see what I did there. And then the next time we'll try it again, but we'll go back to remote, and you make it work for the people that you work for, which maybe is the big takeaway.
I love it. Chris, who's our interview today?
So that is actually Anya Ashouri.
Yay! So we did a coaching call with Anya. Is it a two-part? I think it was probably two-part. We probably did a lot of talking.
In fact, this will be a two-part episode as well. We'll break it up and this is Anya Ashouri part 1, and then next week will be part 2.
So I have to say, Chris, Anya just posted in AAC for the SLP. She basically said she did her first AAC assessment and, gave all of those findings at an IEP meeting and shared those with the team and got this student that she was working with an AAC system. And she just had a message of gratitude to all the people that helped her along the way, us included, and she tagged us. And it was just such an amazing thing to read. And it got a lot of traction, I think, on that group. A lot of people liked it, commented, and I think it's just an important reminder that one, just because you don't necessarily have skills right now doesn't mean you can't gain those skills, right? Like Anya came to us really not sure of how to do an AAC assessment, what to do. She had lots of questions. We helped kind of guide her through that process. But, we have the ability to learn, right? Just like our kids do. We have the ability to learn new skills and seek out the information that we need. And I will give Anya credit for that, because did she ever seek out the information she needed? I feel like she was on a mission to figure out who could help her gain these skills. And I think it's really admirable, how dedicated she is to the students that she works with and serves, because she realized what she didn't know. And she, was, courageous enough to admit that first. And then second, diligent enough to figure out how to gain the information that she was missing. And so I'm really excited to share this interview, because I feel like, this coaching call was really powerful, I think, for her. And also it just is a testament to, and Anya has a lot of experience as an SLP. I don't know if she said she's been an SLP for 10 years or, but, it's never too late to learn these skills. And, she did it in a reasonably short amount of time too. We oftentimes get questions from people I don't know how do I do an AAC assessment, or how do I, become an AAC specialist? And it's just start learning. Just start learning. Listen to the podcast. Of course, we're going to promote that just because it's a free resource and we talk about it every week. But, there's information out there to learn how to do these things. And again, I think Anya is a perfect example of how, she was like, okay, I need to know these things and I'm going to figure it out.
Be like Anya.
Yes, we love Anya. She's a Patreon member too, which is super exciting. So hopefully she'll be at our Talking with Tech Live,
which is coming up here on October 27th at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific time. And Talking with Tech Live, you sign up for Patreon and you'll get the link right there.
Yep, it's patreon.com/talkingwithtech. I'm really excited for that, Chris. The lives with our Patreon, I feel like are extra special, because I feel like it's all our top fans in one place, and we can all geek out on AAC things.
It's going to be great. It's going to be great. So without further ado, let's listen to our coaching call, part 1, with Anya Ashouri. Hey there! If you love listening to this podcast, we would be so grateful for your support to keep it going. By becoming a Patreon member, you can not only help us cover the cost of this podcast, but you can get some really great bonus content as well. We post video tutorials, behind-the-scenes recordings, and bonus segments from our interviews. We would love for you to join us by going to patreon.com/talkingwithtech. That's patreon.com/talkingwithtech. Welcome to Talking with Tech. My name is Chris Bouguet, and I'm here with Rachel Madel, but not just Rachel Madel. I'm here today also with Anya Ashouri. How you doing, Anya? How you doing, Rachel?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, we're excited for this call, Chris. It's another coaching call.
It is. These are some of our favorite experiences, Anya, because we get really good feedback from listening to the people that listen to the podcast. So we can often go back and reflect about how changes and things we want to make in the podcast. So let's talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Fantastic. Well, I am new to AAC and AT. A little bit of background is I work at a non-public school for children diagnosed with autism with behavioral challenges. I've been at the school 7 years and had this epiphany when I started my AT certificate that, oh my gosh, so many of these kids that I'm working with need AAC. And I also was subscribed to the myth that children that are nonverbal need AAC, or students need some kind of prerequisites to begin with AAC. So anyway, long story short, this last year has taught me a lot. And so I'm trying to create change at the school that I'm at. Currently, I'm starting 3 AAC assessments, but I'm also starting an AT program here with, so we're beginning services for all students. And so I guess it would be amazing. There's sort of twofold, like AAC and sort of AT for the greater, for the greater population at the school.
Awesome. You say you're new, but you said you've been at the school for 7 years. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, most of the time I've been really working on the social cognition aspect of working with these students with behavioral challenge with autism. So a lot of like cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot of Michelle Garcia Winner stuff, and zones of regulation, and less emphasis on the assistive technology piece. In fact, to be honest, no one was really talking about assistive technology and accommodations. And not until I was in my course, my coursework, did I realize, oh my gosh, we should be having this conversation at every single IEP. And it's not just, schedules or, preferred seating. There's so many other tools that could really help kids. And I kind of have this, I would like to do more research on this, but I really feel like a lot of the behavioral challenges stem from not having access to academics that meet their needs. And this inaccessibility coupled with troubles with emotional regulation, there's behavioral challenges. And so I really think that if we're meeting their needs and we're giving them access to different ways of, reading and writing and using language, we're going to meet their needs and it's going to mitigate a lot of problems. That's my hypothesis. So
I think it's a swell hypothesis.
Yeah.
And I'll add to that. I feel like also with like not strong communication skills, right? So I work with a lot of students with autism, and just like all of those things kind of when they converge, just create a lot of resistance sometimes to, activities, school, like, you name it. And so I think if we can make things more accessible for kids, introduce technology that can help support the learning process, make it more fun and engaging and easier, then we can see a lot of success with the students that we're working with.
Absolutely. And so many, like I'm thinking, we have a few different classrooms, but one classroom of high schoolers that have more significant language and communication challenges, they're still using worksheets. And like, how many ways can you differentiate a worksheet and make it accessible, right? Coupled with troubles with language. And we're all like, oh my gosh, they have behavioral needs. And it's like, everyone's focused on the fever, but underneath the fever are a lot of unmet needs. And it's up to us to figure out, let's go upstream and create change so that we're not sitting in the fever and wondering how we got here.
Oh, yeah. 100%. So Anya, you said that you have kind of grown, especially in the past year, with changing your own mindset and perspectives. Can you talk about that a little bit? What's that experience been like? And what was the catalyst? Like, what was the recognition that we can't stop, or we need to stop treating the symptoms. We need to start treating the causes of the symptoms.
Well, I actually got that sort of mindset, the let's stop thinking about the fever. We're all focused on the problem and less about the solution from this Dr. Ross Green, who works with behaviorally challenged kids. And he has sort of a different model, more of a collaborative model. And I know we all subscribe to like including students in part of the problem solving. So with him, I got a lot of that sort of mindset change, but a huge catalyst was pandemic, as it was for so many people. But just to back up for 1 second, I was working with an AT specialist for a student with writing needs. And she was showing me Clicker Connect. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, like, so all our kids need something like this, right? They're all using worksheets. Like, absolutely, this makes it so much more accessible. And there's word banks. And so it got me thinking. I was like, wait a minute. I looked more into AT. And so that's why I got my certificate. And I started AT when the pandemic hit. So that's when my course started. And then I just found like YouTube videos, and I found, Rachel and Sarah Gregory and Chris. I watched, you guys' like AAC in the cloud, and just, Closing the Gap and ATIA. And I've done a lot of like personal growth, because I think a piece of that was guilt of not having realized that sooner. So like, this is my opportunity to like acknowledge it, but also shift and create the change that I want to see in special education.
Well, first of all, when you know better, you do better. So like we all have the experience of being like, wow, I wish I would have known this, 5 years ago, or, like at the beginning of my career. And it's like, we can't possibly know it all. So you're doing everything you can to, meet your students' needs now. And Anya, we've seen you at all of our speaking events, and we know your name. You're a Patreon member, like you really have committed, which is all we can do as clinicians, right? Is like do the best we can to learn about strategies and tools that could be helpful for the students that we work with, and do our best to implement them in a way that's really going to move the needle for kids. So we're happy you're here. Let's get down to business on like what we can actually help with. Like, what are the pain points for you currently? You've learned a lot about AAC, assistive technology. You've done all of the coursework, it sounds like. What's still kind of underlying where you're like, I don't really know, I need guidance?
I think you're right. It's like now I'm in like the application process. So I think it's twofold. It's like, I might not be here forever. So we need like an AAC sort of program here. If anything were to happen or, things change, that there is systems in place for AAC and evaluations and that sort of thing. But also for AT, we just had assistive technology added to our certificate because I wrote the board and was like, how do we get this on here? So now we finally have it, which allowed us to do our own AAC evaluations. So a piece of it is AAC. How do we create that system here? And then also just AT. And I know Chris actually heard one of your episodes with another coaching call of an educational experience designer. And I'm totally blanking on her name. But you guys talked about the tiered approach, and maybe I've heard that before. Just a tiered AT approach to, and I know like sort of AACs maybe on the third tier, more individualized and specific to a student. But then there's also, I'd be interested in knowing like, what are the other tiers? Is that something that we can implement here? Obviously Joy Zabala's the set framework is really important. So like maybe when we have a kid that's, opting out of writing and we sit down, we're like, all right, so let's go through like the student environment tools and or tasks and tools. Like, do we just end it at that? Or like, at what point are we doing more in-depth AT assessments as well? And sort of like, here's the other caveat is people, and I am doing an AT in service. It's used interchangeably here. I'm like, no. The umbrella is AT. AAC is in the umbrella, but it's an outlier, right? Because that's the only one that the speech pathologist can do. But so there's a learning curve too.
So there's a couple of things there to comment on. The first one is you are coming into this into assistive technology in an interesting time where even would be pre-pandemic, just a whole field of assistive technology, if it even is a field, has been sort of wrestling with this idea of, do we do evaluations or do we do sort of resource consideration and we guide people through that process? And there's that. And so in order to answer that question, let me ask you, what does your current process look like? So let's say you're thinking the student is struggling with X, or we need a student wants to learn Y. How do you consider what they might need? What does it look like?
Well, we haven't done a whole lot in that area right now, to be honest, because we just got our certification for me to be able to do that. And we've had outside providers come in. And what that has looked like is they meet with the student. They don't really meet with our team. There's not a lot of carryover. There's not a lot of coaching in the tools that the student was using. So now that we just are all now in person again, I feel like that could be a little bit easier vehicle for creating some change. My thoughts were, we do have clinical meetings at our school. Each classroom gets 2 clinical meetings a month. And those clinical meetings, there's, the BCBAs, the speech therapists, OT, classroom staff. And I thought that would be a really great opportunity, because we talk about kids that are having challenges, an opportunity to like carve out whatever, 15, 20 minutes, half hour, to do a quick set framework and be like, okay, so what are, kind of go through that, because it's sort of an informal, everybody's at the table already, except maybe the student would also need to be present. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Sounds like, do you have someone in mind that you could try that with and start off with?
Yes, actually. There's just a referral for that.
Go ahead, Rachel.
I was going to say, how do you think that the team would respond to that?
I think that they would be open. I think there's a piece where everyone's like, yes, what do you got? We'll try it. So that's really good. I have a good rapport with everyone at work. So it's like the collaboration piece is open, good communication, which is important. You can't just walk in there and tell people what to do. But I also I know you guys talk a lot about coaching versus consult. And so I have sort of changed my mindset in less consult, more like, well, what do you think we could do? It sounds like he's struggling. What are some, sort of creating more of that critical thinking and reflective questions. Mm-hmm. So I think that it would go well. We also kind of need an AT sort of library where it's like, all right, let's, building that up. So it's like, okay, let's trial some things here that maybe aren't so low tech.
If there were going to be a roadblock with this plan that you could anticipate, which we can't always anticipate the roadblocks, wouldn't that be nice? But if there were going to be, what do you think that roadblock would be? It's
a good question. Right now, my greatest roadblock is more just administrative buy-in. I think that a lot of, and that is more, on me to, and I am going to meet with the owner and the director, is really, this isn't an add-on. This isn't, whoa, this is such a nice feature we have at this school now. It's well, it's actually mandated by law, for all of us to be doing this. And it might be educational malpractice if we're just completely ignoring it. Right. So I think a little bit of there's some urgency here, guys. This isn't Anya saying this fluffy new thing might be fun for our kids and teachers. It's it's actually, we should have been doing this. And so creating some urgency is our first step, and awareness. But the other key factor is maybe a barrier would be just, implementation across, in the environment consistently. It's also as you guys know, our caseloads are so full as speech therapists, and it's I don't got a lot of extra time to be sitting in the classroom making sure these are, being executed. Mm-hmm. So time is a barrier.
When it comes to implementation, and like you said, making sure that there's follow through and carryover into the entire environments, what do you think would need to happen in order for that to happen?
I think it would be helpful to have some point people in the classroom. It's so when we're doing the set framework, okay, so what's our action plan? Who's going to do it? Who's going to collect the data? And when are we going to meet? And sort of having people some accountability, because I think when there's no accountability, it's easy for things to great, this is a great plan, but then, false starts and then nothing gets, executed. Or maybe it's inconsistent execution and it's this doesn't work. So there needs to be some training too, which is another. So it's I don't know how you've done it in the past or what you recommend, but I see maybe training a teacher or a staff in the student, and then sort of stepping away and checking back in and seeing so how's it going, at our clinical meetings or in between.
What would you envision that training to look like? Because it'd probably be you who'd have to do the training.
Yeah.
So what would you think would need to happen for that training to be successful? For someone to actually be able to say, oh yeah, Anya, I don't need you anymore. I've got it,
Mm-hmm. I think videos are great. I mean, I would do it, do in person, but then also make create a video so that they could go back and watch it. And I think really short, brief, like 2 or 3 minute videos is like all the cognitive, like, you know, availability people have at this time. But that could be in creating sort of like a library maybe, like, and I talked to our IT guy about creating like a YouTube channel for our school where we could put professional development in there. So people can be like, oh yeah, what was that? What was that strategy about, you know, you like AAC modeling? Oh, let's go to the AAC library in our YouTube channel and kind of check it out. So I kind of saw that piece as helping for teaching and implementation. But I'm open to hearing any other ideas.
So there's a few things that I love about what you're talking about, and I just want to highlight them. One, you're thinking about long-term. What about when I'm not here? So let's just start there. Thank you. Thank you for thinking about, like, when we set something up, like, it can't be contingent on us being there. Right. Yeah. And I feel like so often, like, we're just like figuring out all these things. But if we're not thinking ahead to, like, I might not always be here. I might not have this job at this place. I might do something different. You know, creating systems in place where people understand a process. So I think that's one of the values of setting up a process within an organization. So I love that you're talking about this. I also love that you're talking about, how can I automate this? How can I duplicate myself so that I'm not constantly having to have, you know, one-on-one interactions? And when I am having one-on-one interactions, I want it to be really valuable. I want it to be strategic. What am I talking about during those one-on-one interactions? I'm talking about coaching people in real time, instead of here's this foundational understanding of this tool or how to change this setting. Like, things like that, I feel like are automated. So I like, when I'm thinking about like processes within my own practice, I'm thinking, like, what do I actually need to be there with? Like, what's important to this, like, interaction and connection that I'm having with someone, versus what's like a technical aspect to something that, you know, I don't want to waste my time talking about the technical details of a tool, when I can just have a YouTube clip or some type of automated thing, like, here, just watch this. This will teach you how to set this system up, or, you know, and, you know, fill in the blank, whatever it might be. So I just love that you're thinking through that lens. I also want to share a story, actually, that I've never shared, Chris, with you, but it popped up in my brain. The first time I ever sat for a set framework meeting, I was a young clinician. I think I might have just been like, I might have even been a CFY. I don't even know. I was very young. And I remember, like, saying, like, hearing all these emails, like, Rachel, you have to be at this set framework meeting. And I was like, I don't even know what this is. Like, what is this? What is this set framework meeting? And no one ever explained it to me. We just, like, dove in to, like, okay, let's talk about the student. Like, let's talk about the environment. And I was like, what is this? So I share this to say, like, when you're, it sounds like you're working from the ground up. Like, people do not, in your organization, do not have an understanding, even a little bit, about, like, what even assistive technology is. So, just thinking about my experience in that meeting, I feel like teaching people what it is and why it's important. Because like, if someone would have said, like, hey, Rachel, this is like a framework that we're using to select a tool that can be really helpful for this student. We're doing this together because a team-based approach, you know, is effective, because we want everyone's input when we're deciding what a good tool, you know, or technology will be for the student. If someone sat me down and said that, I'd be like, oh, cool. Like, I'm happy to be a part of this. But, like, as a young clinician who had no idea about any of this stuff, I was like, what is this? Like,
what's this acronym?
Right. I was just like, and they were like asking me all these questions I didn't know how to respond to. I was like, I'm not really sure. And so anyway, I feel like sometimes we have all this information, and you've been gathering a lot of information over, you know, the last year. We forget what it's like to have no idea what any of this stuff is. And so I think that just thinking through that lens and trying to simplify it, and then also, like, talking about the why, like, why is this important? Why are we sitting here doing this? Because we're taking people's time, and time is valuable. So if people don't understand the value, like, they're not bought in, right, to even sitting in the meeting, because they're like, what is this? It could potentially feel like a waste of time if people don't understand the purpose. How's that sound?
That sounds great. And I just heard this other tidbit about buy-in is show up in the classroom, like, spend time in the classroom, because people are more apt to listen and see you as a collaborative, you know, role than like being like, try this, and this is the set framework, and let's, but like, yes, absolutely. I think explaining what it is and why it's important is key.
Yeah. And people see you as a partner, right? It's not this like, oh, like this person's coming in. Like I remember my set framework and it was this AAC specialist coming in and being like, okay, everybody, like, and it was like rapid fire questions. And I was like, like it was really intense.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that like when you show up in the classroom and you start showing that you're there to be helpful and that you're there for a purpose. And I think that can go a long way.
All right, I'm not going to coach. I'm going to consult now. I'm going to tell you some specific things that'll save you some time based on experience and my own mistakes, right? So first of all, when you are going into the classroom, something that I would really highly encourage you to do is to set up a number of sessions, maybe 6 to 8 sessions that have some sort of specific purpose in mind. So that the first session might be kind of hearing about what the teacher is doing and learning about the teacher, what the goals are in the classroom. The second might be like, let's talk about some specific skills that you want to learn. The third could be you doing it. Let me watch me as I, whatever the skill might be, wrestle with it and struggle with it and try and be on the same playing field. And then next time I'm going to watch you and I'm going to pass the baton off and you're going to see this pivot to now you learning the skills. But each time you're coming with a specific purpose. If you don't do that, and I've done it where I've said, hey, I'm going to show up on these days and we'll see what happens when I get there. It becomes sort of nebulous and not necessarily helpful. It might be helpful in like a microcosm, like, oh, in this day I helped, or I helped this person even in this, like the next 2 or 3 months. But like Rachel said, and the way you were thinking, it didn't have legs. It didn't have a long-term systemic. It didn't have a long-term systemic effect. That makes sense. The second thing I'd like to consult with is, having done that set framework for many years, so many people think of that conversation as picking a tool. We're looking at the student, and then we're looking at the environment, and then we're looking at the tasks, and we're going to look at all of that to select a tool. But I'm here to tell you that that's only one part of it. Selecting a tool, that is a good use of that. But as you're having that set framework discussion, and I think this is where your head was going when you had mentioned it, Anya, earlier about looking at like the design of everything, the educational experience design, is also, so you might say, okay, what kind of outcome do we want to have from this set framework? We want to pick a tool. But as we're having this discussion, what else needs to change in the environment? Like, let's not just do this to pick a tool. What are some things we might change in the environment to make the situation better, like behaviors, for instance? And then what tasks are we asking the student to do? Well, maybe that's something that could be changed. What's the experience we want kids to have when they're in this environment? Can we bend more than necessarily asking the student to bend? And those sorts of questions come up through the set framework. It's designed that way, but so often people just get focused on that end result of a tool as opposed to looking at the breadth of all of it.
Like zooming out, not just the tree, but the forest.
Yes.
I'm going to add to that. This actually was remember the Carly Hines episode, Chris? It was a long time ago. It was like I feel like it was the first year of our podcast. She's a teacher in the UK. And something that she said to me, like, always stuck, which was like, if you're going to go into the classroom, don't just talk about one kid. And like, meaning like make the classroom work better for all the kids. And I think that's kind of to your point, Chris, which is like, yes, we're talking about a specific student and the environment and the task and all these things to find a tool. But like, as we're having those discussions, it's a great opportunity to talk about other strategies that could be utilized in the classroom to change the environment that could be, helpful for all the kids. And I think as teachers, as SLPs, we're like used to doing like one-on-one therapy or small group, but teachers, like they have a whole classroom of kids that they are responsible for keeping safe, teaching, they have a huge responsibility on their plate. And so I think that, being cognizant of doing things in a way that make it helpful for all of the kids, instead of just like obviously we can laser focus on one student as a way to provide examples and all of these things. But I think that, helping teachers across the board with all of their students in the classroom is a really great way to build rapport and say like, hey, like, yes, I'm here for this student because he's on my caseload, but like, I'm here for all of your kids. And I want to make, your classroom experience a better experience for everyone.
I like that. And they'll probably get more buy-in from the teacher.
100%.
Right?
Yes.